You're listening to Health Innovators, a podcast and video show about the leaders, influencers, and early adopters who are shaping the future of healthcare. I'm your host, Dr. Roxy Mooney. Welcome back, Health Innovators. On today's episode, we have Erik Osland with us, who is the managing partner for EvolveMd. Welcome to the show, Erik.
Thanks for having us. We're excited to share our story.
We're so excited to have you here and kind of dig deeper into your commercialization story. So let's just get started by sharing with our listeners a little bit about your background and what you're innovating these days.
Yeah, so, our story is unique in the sense that we're tackling a very complex issue that exists right now in the United States and in larger parts of the world around mental health and access to care. My journey into this space started about 20 years ago. I graduated from the University of Arizona down in Tucson, and upon graduation really entered the healthcare workforce, working predominantly on the device and manufacturing side. And, over the following 15 years, elevated my position into kind of the national accounts roles, where I work predominantly with large health systems to develop services and strategies for them to manage patient care, and did a lot of contracting and developed a lot of really great experience. And, the time ultimately came where I felt that I was ready to take on the entrepreneurial journey and left corporate America about 6 years ago and started at the time what was a small family shop. We opened a pathology laboratory where we processed tissue and specimen for different categories of healthcare. That business was ultimately divested in June of last year so that we could focus on the project that we're talking about today, which is, to me, the culmination of my entrepreneurship journey. It's a project that I'm passionate about because I have a personal experience and a personal story. And I'm also passionate about it because I feel like this is an area that I can make or our team can make a substantial contribution to the health and welfare of our community, which involves our employees and the patients we serve.
So tell us about that personal story.
Yeah, so I had an experience that is very common when it comes to aging parents. I had a father who was chronically ill, and he was ill for a long, long time, about 10-year period of time. My mother was the primary caregiver. And our journey really started about 4 years ago, back in 2015. My dad was chronically ill, had multiple disease sets, including onset dementia. He was on 17 medications and he slept about 18 hours a day. And as a family, we were having the conversation around how do we provide care for my father? Is dad just really a sick guy? Or is he a sick guy that it's being complicated by the fact that he's on all these medications? Mm-hmm. And then there were the financial considerations. I think my parents were spending about $1,000 a month on medications, even though they were on Medicare. And I was in a fortunate position. At the time, I had a pharmacist that worked for me on another project. He and I came together and we ran what is known as a medication therapy management program with my father. We took some pretty progressive steps with my dad from the medication front, kind of with the notion of, quality of life versus quantity. And it was a great experience. I think it was the first time in a long time that anybody had really taken a hard look at my father's medications and looking at things like dosing, optimization, polypharmacy, compliance, those types of things. And so we got really, really interested in the category. We went to the Arizona State Physicians Association and we said, hey, there's this clinical concept. We think it has a ton of utility. Give us a shot and find us a pilot. So they found us a pilot out in the West Valley here in Phoenix. We launched that program back in 2016. We ran the pilot for about 6 months and managed 400 patients. And the experience was great. I actually did intake for the pharmacist. So if you're familiar with that space, I did med reconciliation. Patients would bring their brown bags of medication in and we'd reconcile it in the report. And then I would hand the patients off to the pharmacist who would do a full 40-minute consult. It was a great experience. We learned a lot of lessons. Number one, we learned that the business model we would deploy to plug other things into primary care would work to plug other things, other subspecialties. Mm-hmm. We learned that there was a ton of clinical utility as far as aligning pharmacists with primary care providers to manage complex patients. But we also learned the hard lesson that healthcare is complex and paying for these things can be a challenge. And so After running the pilot for 6 months, the practice asked us to continue. We didn't feel comfortable with the payment mechanisms that existed at the time, and so we made the hard decision to put that program on the shelf. But the takeaways were the business model would work, and something from a data point came up that was really, really interesting, which was we decided to screen all of these complex chronically ill patients for depression. And this is kind of before it was in vogue to do that. And what we found was that 40% of these patients with chronic illnesses screened positive for depression. And none of them, like a zero, had ever had a behavioral health resource. And so we said, hey, there's a huge unmet need. Let's take a look at different strategies to integrate services into primary care. And let's see if we can address this issue. So we identified the model. I brought in a really strong partner, Steve Bilgen, to help commercialize the program. We placed another pilot about 6 months later. We ran the pilot for a year with a good deal of success. And fast forward to today, we now have 21 sites here spread across Arizona with some pretty aggressive expansion goals here in 2021. We're going to go from 21 sites to somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 to 80 in the next 12 to 18 months. So it's going to be a fun process.
So it's such an interesting journey and such an incredible need today. You know, obviously there was a need when you were able to discover that 40% had, mental health challenges, but hadn't been diagnosed or weren't getting any type of behavioral health treatment. But who would have ever predicted how we might be accelerated and thrusted into the mental health concerns, that we're currently experiencing with the pandemic? So how has the pandemic impacted your business or your commercialization journey?
Yeah, change was coming from a mental health and physical health perspective. Like thought leaders in academia and throughout the country, they've understood for a long time that integrating these two services together would lead to better outcomes. But the change was happening painfully slow. And so I think if we look at COVID and we try to pull something positive out of it, I think that it has driven the need to expedite the process of integrating these two services. And so I'm really confident today to say that in 10 years, you just won't go into a primary care practice and not have access to resources. We're heading that direction, and COVID has expedited that. Now, unfortunately, COVID's also taken a system that was already stretched to capacity and added additional needs to it. Prevalence rates right now in the adult population in the U.S. for an underlying health condition is roughly 41%. That's data from the CDC that was released in, I think, October. And also some really frightening metrics around suicidal ideation. Now 11% of the U.S. adult population has actively considered suicide in the last 30 days. And I think what's frightening within that data set is if you look at the younger people, right, the 18 to 44 bracket, that number is even higher. It's about 1 in 5. So, it's really presented us with a situation that we can't ignore it any longer. We have to begin to address it.
Yeah, for sure. So tell us a little bit about this commercialization journey. You kind of told us a little bit about your background and how you got started, but what do you think, kind of as you reflect on that journey, what do you think are some of those key decisions that you made that have led you to the success that you're experiencing today?
Yeah, we were fortunate that a lot of really sharp people did some very wonderful work in front of us to develop the model we use today, which is called psychiatric collaborative care. And so we knew this model was a good platform to start with. I think where we garnered some initial successes, we didn't initially look at it from a therapeutic perspective. We looked at it from an operational perspective to kind of figure out, what are the challenges we're going to face with scaling this model. And specifically, we looked at the provider base. And very quickly, we identified that there was a systematic issue when it came to we'll call it therapists or social workers, which is, if you look at that subclass of employees, these folks are typically the most compassionate folks you will ever meet. They've made sacrifices economically to take on the positions that they take on because they genuinely care about people. And then we as a system, what do we do with these folks? We give them complex patient caseloads. We overwhelm them and we burn them out. And so turnover in these two subsets is very, very high. And so we very quickly identified the need to look at how we would pursue employees or future employees, and then ultimately support them throughout the employee life cycle. And so, we tell a lot of people that we are an organization that's provider focused, which is a little bit different than what you hear in the healthcare. You hear a lot of we are a patient focused organization. Now, we care dearly about the patients we serve, but we just feel like if we attack it from a different angle, which is let's identify great people and bring them in the organization, and then let's support them both personally and professionally. And if we develop these folks along the way and they're healthy and they're happy, guess what? The product and the therapeutic interventions they put out are going to be high level, and we're going to deliver good patient care as a result. So we just always knew that was going to be a core focus, and we built that into our culture. And so that's put us in a position today where it's a very competitive landscape to hire and retain social workers and counselors. And, we're viewed as a good place to work, which is nice. And so I think that is one of the most important aspects of our journey, is that, we can do all of these things from a workflow and an efficiency perspective and from a financial modeling perspective. But if you can't go out and hire good people and then keep them, you're in a bad spot.
Yeah.
And so really,
always.
It's a key part of our growth, our growth story.
So what about the providers themselves, your customers? How did you persuade them to adopt your solution? Because, practices can be, kind of stuck in their old way of doing things. And, you're kind of putting other team members that aren't part of their, direct staff into those practices. So tell us a little bit about how did you persuade them to say yes and come on in?
It wasn't easy at the start. It's getting easier because the market's changing and people are more open to the dialogue. But man, it was a tough slog. And fortunately, our backgrounds, we have some traditional sales experience, and we just knew how to kind of slog it out in the trenches.
Yeah.
But I think fast forward to today, and how do we garner adoption? It's that integration can be difficult, especially when you think about physical and behavioral, because they've been so separate and they're almost like two different languages. And so, our value prop to practices is, look, it can be difficult, but that's what we're being hired to do, right? Is to do the heavy lifting and to work with you to set protocol and understand how you want to manage your patients, both from a physical and a behavioral health perspective. But once we understand how you want to manage your patient population, then it's our job to go and do the heavy lift, to design the workflows, train the staff, hire the staff, place them, manage them, and make sure the program is not only successful from an economic perspective, but that it's successful ongoing from a clinical perspective. So, our value prop is, we're going to come and do the heavy lifting on what is a very difficult process of integrating behavioral health services.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. So one of the things that I also hear pretty often is, you might get, some of these companies, health systems or practices to say yes to whatever innovation, whether it's a product, a service, whatever that looks like, say yes. But, like anything, you've got a mixed bag when it comes to the actual implementation and operationalization of that. So, you have blockers, you have naysayers. And so tell us a little bit about what you encountered and maybe how you overcame that.
Yeah. So, we've been fortunate to make some mistakes when it comes to garnering support across the entire stakeholder environment. And through those mistakes, we've learned really good lessons that will lead the way. But I think it's going into an organization that's external, identifying who the key stakeholders are and the decision makers are, really top to bottom. And then, having a collaborative conversation and building consensus, because the mistakes that we've made is that we've been in situations where we have top level executive support, but we didn't get all the way across the spectrum. And we ultimately ran into challenges that we had to go back and course correct on. And so, really identifying who all the stakeholders are in the process, helping them understand the process, the model, how we cooperate. We are not consultants. We are true clinical operators. So we place people in these clinics, and then we continue to support them. So this is really a very high level of alignment with our customers.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So it sounds like, like many innovators, you've run into some obstacles and some roadblocks along the way, but you've made sure that you were, paying attention to that and learning and then being able to adapt, which is really what we're all experiencing in this journey.
Yeah. I mean, mistakes are part of the process, right?
Right.
And as long as we're learning from the mistakes we make, and as long as we have good intentions, then, we should be able to move forward. And I think that's a message that we give to all of our employees as well, right? We want to equip our folks with the ability to make decisions for their sites, for the organization. And typically what we'll tell folks is, look, if you're thoughtful about the problem and you come up with a solution, and we make a mistake, that's fine. As long as you were thoughtful and you work through the process, mistakes are fine as long as we have the ability to address them and learn from them and move forward.
And obviously that's a big part of the culture, in your leadership, being able to create that culture, to become a learning organization that's embracing that. Yeah. Yeah.
And being a learning organization is one of our core tenets. So yes.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So I didn't know that, but I could already sense it. Oh yeah. So getting the first pilot, turning that into a paying customer, tell us that story.
It's funny. We used to say the joke where when we first started, we didn't have all the answers, and it was sometimes taking these folks that believed in our journey and believed in us and just kind of grabbing them by the shoulders and just say, trust us. Yeah. And it wasn't quite that simple, but in a lot of ways, our first few customers really, they just bought into who we were and what we were trying to achieve. And, they knew this wasn't just a slam, try to make some money and get out. It was really trying to change the paradigm. So it took a lot of trust from our core subset of customers. And I think we're very appreciative of that. And I think, we've worked hard over the last few years to prove ourselves there. And so, initially, anytime you're driving change and doing something different, you need to help your customers understand the journey you're on, and they need to trust you. And understand that you have good intentions. And if you do those things, they're going to give you a little bandwidth. And we were fortunate, we got in, we executed, we created a sustainable program, maybe not a really efficient organization, but we created one that was sustainable. And then we built off of it. And we spent the last 4 years trying to figure out how to make this more efficient, how to make the clinical output more positive, how to add additional modules, whether it's diabetes or pain management to it. So really just continue to enhance upon it. Because our journey, we're nowhere near the end. We kind of look at this as a burgeoning field. We're certainly one of the first players. And our goal is to advance our module to the point where as new players enter the market, it's going to be very difficult for them to compete because we are constantly reinvesting in the organization and the people that support it.
Yeah. Yeah. Always one or two steps behind you, right?
Yeah.
And not having all those learnings to leverage along the way. Yeah. So as we kind of think about the future, what's next for you in 2021 and beyond, where do you kind of see the growth and how that's affecting your commercialization?
Yeah. So, growth is exciting. It can also be painful if it's not done thoughtfully. And so, for us, I think at the core of what's going to happen for us in the next year, we are going to grow and we'll grow substantially. We will most likely, our FTE count will triple this calendar year. And so with that, the core objective is can we grow and retain our culture? Mm-hmm. And so we've made some significant investments in our internal infrastructure to prepare for that growth. But growth is coming both inside the state of Arizona and outside. We do have an aspiration to be a national provider, and that will become a reality this year. And so there's new markets that we'll be launching and announcing here in the very near future. But beyond that, I think one common theme for entrepreneurs, especially with a startup, and I guess we are a startup, is how do you fund these activities? And the typical journey, there's a lot of different ways to get to the end game. A lot of folks will seek external investors and give up equity. Our perspective is we want to bootstrap this as long as we can, and we've been able to do that up into this point, and we will continue down that path in 2021. And so we've really leveraged strong relationships in the institutional lending space. We've learned lessons about the importance of developing relationships with a bank, and specifically a local bank that can actually be invested in your business.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've probably experienced the frustrations that other small business has around SBA lending and access to capital. It's just not necessarily as easy or as smooth as sometimes you'd like it, but you fight through those battles, you adapt, and we've just really focused on that as kind of our engine for growth on the capitalization side.
Yeah, that's good. Everybody takes a different path, and it sounds like that's working for you. Oh.
Yeah, so far,
and you haven't given up part of your company.
No, that we're going to hold on to it as long as we can, because we think that's part of the special sauce as well.
Sure. Yep. So let's kind of just go back to the COVID, right? The COVID impact that it's had on small businesses and growing businesses, but also particularly businesses like yours, where you're literally placing people into a medical practice. So, I talk to clients all the time, and, there's a bit of a panic of like, oh my gosh, doors are shut, conferences aren't happening, practices aren't letting people in. And so how are we navigating that? And it's really forced us to really think about connecting with people in a more digital and virtual environment than ever before. So, has your model changed where you were tapping into some of the telehealth modality to be able to augment what you might have been doing in the practice?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like everybody, we had to pivot very quickly in 2020. And, it was a tough year in a lot of different ways, maybe more emotionally than anything. But there was also some great lessons to be learned. And I think the virtual platform, everybody in healthcare learned about the value and the efficacy of this. We as an organization feel very strongly about personal connection with patients. Mm-hmm. And we feel very strongly about the notion that we can most effectively deliver care in an environment where we can sit in front of a patient, and when that patient is distraught or upset, we can embrace that patient. But COVID has taught us that we have to have alternative streams to communicate with patients, because maybe that is a better avenue for the patients to access care. And in the current environment, we have to. And so we did not embrace virtual care at all leading up to COVID. And we were forced to pivot very, very quickly. And I want to say within 2 weeks of kind of the onset and the shutdown, we had pivoted over. We had our folks up and running on a system, and we effectively converted. And the net impact of that conversion was, number one, we could service the existing patient base, which we saw grow by about 20% kind of mm-hmm. within our existing clinics, just based upon what's happening in the world. And so we could see more patients. Our no-show rate dropped from about 40% down to 25%. So that was a positive impact.
Wow, that's huge.
And, I think clinically, we learned that like this is a platform that you can deliver behavioral health through. It's maybe not as efficacious as the face-to-face, which will always be our core business, but this is a good platform for certain people in certain markets. So
yeah.
It'll be something.
Yeah, that, a hybrid model, thinking about just as individuals, as people, where we all have different preferences and being able to accommodate that. So even past the pandemic, those that still want to connect digitally and those that still want a human hug.
Yeah, I want to say that 2021 is going to be the year of the hugs again. We're going to get back after it.
Can't wait.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah. So, as you kind of think back on your journey, who has been instrumental in this, whether it's been like your rock and your shoulder to cry on, or it's been, somebody who's been mentoring and advising you, having those types of people and network is so critically important. I feel so strongly that everyone needs a thinking partner that's external to the organization to really be able to help us see things maybe that we can't see internally. So who has that been for you, and tell us those stories?
Yeah, so I totally agree. I think as an organization with a learning culture, we have to be willing to listen to other voices, both inside and outside of our organization. But I've been really fortunate. I think it starts with my business partner, Steve Bilgen. I've known Steve for a long time. One of the most thoughtful individuals that you ever have, and I think what's been great for us is we both have very unique skill sets, and they complement one another. And so, Steve really has been, the thoughtful voice in my head for the last couple of years as we build this. We've been going through this process together, and so it starts with Steve. Certainly my wife. It's tough. We try to live a balanced life. I don't talk about work a whole lot if I can at home. I don't bring a computer home at all. That's just kind of a rule of mine. So I try to separate it. But beyond that, I've been fortunate. Steve's been fortunate to have some really good mentors in the marketplace. Folks that have gone through this journey, maybe not a behavioral health, but from a business perspective or an entrepreneur perspective. So, there's 5 or 6 people that I won't call out, but these are folks when I run up against a complex situation that I maybe don't have the confidence or the experience with. I reach out to them, I ask them their opinion, and I listen. And beyond that too, we also understand that we have some weaknesses that we can fill with really talented folks. So we've been recruiting and bringing really sharp people into the organization that really enhance what we're able to do and how we can operate.
You touched on something that I'm starting to see this pattern as talking to different innovators at different company sizes and stages. And it seems as though, which is not really surprising, but I just didn't put it together, is that for the innovators that are leading a mental or behavioral health company, you all have a tendency to have just some different habits around technology, around rest, around boundaries between work and personal. I was speaking to someone the other day, and hers was a mental health company, and she literally talked about turning her phone off on Friday and not turning it back on until Monday morning. As a startup entrepreneur, and you just said that you don't take your computer home. You guys are blowing my mind right now. Especially for, startup entrepreneurs. it's a rare thing. And I can only imagine how that's really helped you, create more balance between your personal life and your professional life, which makes it all around better. And then just also recharging and refreshing. And I don't think that's something we really talk about enough in this entrepreneurial or commercialization journey, the importance of making sure that you, as the managing partner, don't burn out.
Yeah, I wish I could say that I'm perfect when it comes to habits around self-care. But it's an important aspect. I think more and more people are learning about the fact that look, if I run, this is a marathon. That's a cheesy analogy, but yeah, it's vitally important. I am also probably a believer that part of what we're seeing from a mental health perspective in the U.S. might be related to this thing that's in my hand. We're too connected, and it's too programmed to get certain responses from us. So. I do mitigate it. We certainly have the same approach with our kids and how they look at technology.
Yeah.
But, at the core of it, however you look at technology and working from home, there has to be balance.
Yeah.
And you have to commit every day to doing something for yourself. And that could be meditation, that could be exercise, that could be whatever it is that's important to you. But it is key to keeping you healthy and happy. And, for us as entrepreneurs, it's hard. Everybody knows this journey. It's hard. And if you don't take some time to reset, then you're going to be in a bad spot down the line. So it's important.
So do you think that you're just more tuned into that? Again, I'm not claiming that you're perfect at it. I'm not trying to set you up on some false expectations here. But, do you think that because of the business that you're in, that you're, creating that for yourself and for the culture of your organization, just because you're seeing the impact of not doing some of that?
Yeah. I think, based upon the industry we're in, we understand how important it is, but I also see it. I know how I feel when I reset or if I exercise or if I go for a walk. So I can also feel it. But, we're also accountable for it. I mean, we have a leadership bonus, and one of the components to qualify for your bonus is daily self-care. We track it on a habit tracker to keep people accountable. And, it's just a core part of who we are, and we want to encourage it for everybody in our organization.
I love it. Everybody that's listening, I hope you hit rewind and take notes and adapt that for your own organizations. You will thank yourself for it, as well as your employees. Everyone on your team will thank you for that. And I mean, we probably don't have any in specific scenarios about this on the impact to your bottom line, but it's there, and you will be able to reap the benefits of that one day in the near future, if you're not already benefiting from it.
Yeah. I totally agree. Agree.
So as we're starting to wrap up here, what are some lessons learned along the way, some golden nuggets that you would want to share with our viewers and our listeners who are, at different stages of the innovation process, maybe large organizations that are innovating internally, and maybe a separate business unit, or some other startup entrepreneurs that are kind of hand in hand in the trenches with you?
Yeah, I mean, there's some lessons that I've learned from other entrepreneurs, and I really like Sarah Blakely's story. If you've never heard it on Spanx, I don't own any Spanx, but I still like her story. And
come on, yes you do.
She talks about employee retention and the fact that as you build an organization early on, she took it very personally when people would leave the organization, and how over time she's learned that different people have different journeys, and you shouldn't take it personally. And that's certainly something that I remind myself as we bring new people on and people leave. But beyond that, I would say for me, perspective wise, what has changed over the last 10 years is how I look at the role that employees play in our organization and our success. And, so many times you can just look at them as cogs in the wheel and replaceable. And, that might help the bottom line, or that might, help your shareholders, but in a very short period of time. But in the long run, that doesn't help the organization. It certainly doesn't help your employees. And so, we really tried culturally to bring in good people that are aligned philosophically, and we care about them. And that's, to me, that's the thing that as we grow, it's going to get more difficult because we're a large organization, and it's hard to know everybody on a personal level. But we really do generally care about people. And it's a priority for us. And we think that that's going to lead to the long-term success of the organization. And success means a lot of things. It means that we help more people. It means that the organization prospers. And from a financial perspective, it means that we generate positive revenue stream that's marginally aligned with our expectations. Right. And those things don't have to be separate. You can treat people well and generate good margin. And so, that's my big takeaway. But beyond that, being an entrepreneur is tough. And I think the biggest reason it's tough is that it's mentally taxing. You live and breathe. And, as you're becoming an entrepreneur, there is a certain thing that most of us felt, which is like this dread. It's dread. It's this fear of things that could happen. And it's natural. And I think this is another reason why daily self-care is so important, is because it helps you to address those feelings and come out the other side with a more productive approach.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that says a lot about you and about your leadership. You're talking about employees and viewing them and treating them like human beings, like how you would want to be treated, and then being very intentional about the culture that you're creating. And those are two things that I hear leaders talk about, obviously, but it's not something that I hear a lot of startup entrepreneurs talk about. Like, those are things that people think are important, but it's like phase 2 or 3 of the business, when we are not having to just roll up our sleeves and get stuff done and grind. And so I think that's what I'm, really hearing. That's a stark contrast from the stories that I hear from a lot of other innovators. And I would encourage everyone to think about culture that fits into the employee dynamic much earlier than we have traditionally as entrepreneurs.
Yeah, it's way easier to instill culture when you've got 10 employees versus when you have 1,000.
Right.
So start early and make it a very deliberate act as you grow. It's just a very important central focus for the organization.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thanks so much for sharing your time with us and your experience and stories. I know that our listeners and viewers have gotten some valuable insights from you. How can folks get a hold of you if they want to follow up with you after the show?
Yeah, first and foremost, thanks for having us on. Really enjoyed the conversation, and thank you for letting us share kind of our story. If folks want to get in contact with us, you can reach me at Erik, E-R-I-K, at EvolveMd. That's EvolvedMD.com. We have a website at the same address. Heads up to everybody listening, we've got a major rebranding initiative underway right now. So in the next 6 to 8 weeks, you'll see a new website for us launch with some more information. But yeah, happy to chat with folks that are interested in what we're doing. And thank you again for having us on, Dr. Roxy.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here.
All right. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much for listening. I know you're busy working to bring your life-changing innovation to market, and I value your time and attention. To get the latest episodes on your mobile device automatically, subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher. Thank you for listening, and I appreciate everyone who shared the show with friends and colleagues. See you on the next episode of Health Innovators.